2023 was possibly the worst year for the shark horror movie subgenre ever. I mean, we only got 3 movies, and one of them wasn't even a horror movie, it's more action. 2024 is off to a great start. We are receiving our first shark horror movie in February, with promise of another release on March 14th. As if this channel doesn't have enough shark horror videos, welcome to Rotten Damians. Today we are discussing No Way Up, 2024's first shark horror movie.
Everyone into the water! There be a f***ing shark!
No Way Up was written by Andy Mason, who was involved in the production of 2021's Great White and 2022's Shark Bait, so it's safe to say that this isn't the first time he's sailing these high seas. Pun intended. No Way Up follows suit like most modern shark horror movies, where the sharks are not the only pressing danger. In this movie, the protagonists have crash-landed in the ocean during a flight. The plane had a few holes, causing it to submerge and land on a slope. The plane crash survivors now have to ward off hungry sharks, battle limited oxygen supply, and find a way to the surface before their plane slips into deeper waters, drowning them. Isn't the movie premise just a breath of fresh air? Just kidding, I just wanted to use another pun. But in all seriousness, the movie premise does sound pretty engaging. Unfortunately, the movie is absolutely awful. The writers tried to include too many emotional themes. Okay, are you ready? I'm gonna list all of the emotional themes. Ava, the protagonist, is battling the trauma of her mother's death. The bodyguard is battling the grief of Ava's mother's death. Ava's boyfriend thinks her family controls her life. One of Ava's friends are battling the trauma of nearly drowning. And bro, the worst part is I'm not even finished the list. But I'll stop there because I think I've made my point. It's no surprise that by cramming 20 emotional plot lines, none of them are truly developed, which leads to a poor story and shallow characters. But we'll discuss more about that in a moment.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
The movie begins by introducing our first useless emotional plotline. Brandon, the bodyguard, is having a nightmare about Ava's mother drowning. By this point you might be wondering, why does Ava have a bodyguard? Well, she's the president's daughter. But don't worry about remembering that fact because it never comes up again. Ava and Brandon make their way to the airport to meet her boyfriend Jed and his best friend Carl. They are traveling to Cabo together for a holiday. This is where the movie introduces useless emotional plotline number 2. Jed is upset that Ava brought Brandon along.
You brought the babysitter?
He wanted alone time with her and worries that her father controls her life too much. Don't worry about remembering this because it doesn't come up again. Ava and Brandon then have a serious chat where she reveals that she hasn't gotten over the trauma of her mother's death. And Brandon reveals that he hasn't forgiven himself for not being there and saving the mother.
Things would have been different if I'd been there.
This is the only emotional plotline that I think the movie should have pursued. It makes the most sense and builds the biggest rapport with Ava and Brandon. But instead, we don't hear about Ava's mother again, except when she has a breakdown and looks at old pictures. And Brandon is killed off 5 minutes after their crash, meaning he never gets to redeem himself and save Ava. Anyway, the gang make it onto the flight, where Carl begins acting like a dickhead to Dan, the flight attendant.
I'm sure he's used to spending time on his knees.
But it's okay because Dan can handle his own. During the flight, the airplane flies through a swarm of birds, which causes one of their engines to blow. This leads to a piece of metal breaking off and flying into the window. As you know, you're not supposed to open a window on airplanes because it has a suction effect. So people begin getting sucked out of the plane, and as bad as the movie is, this is probably one of the best scenes. It's really well done and incredibly gory. The plane crashes into the ocean, filling with water and sinking. It lands on a slant, bringing everything to a halt and creating an air pocket on the upper end of the plane. Brandon, Marty and Rosa then swim up to the air pocket from the other side of the plane. And I gotta say, once Brandon popped up out of that water, he immediately went into survival mode, pulling a piece of metal out of his shoulder and cussing at old ladies.
You for real, lady?
Just kidding, but he does keep the group calm by telling them that all they have to do is sit tight because the pilot definitely logged a distress signal, and by using the black box, they'll be found. There is, however, one problem with his plan. Since they're trapped underwater and in an air pocket, they're breathing limited oxygen. Dan checks the emergency reserves, but unfortunately the tanks are empty, forcing Brandon to swim to the flooded area and steal an oxygen tank from a sickly old man. Marty also asks Brandon to bring back her late husband's cap, to which he responds,
You for real, lady?
So Brandon swims on over to platform 9 3/4, where despite being a dickhead, he grabs Marty's husband's cap and the oxygen tank. As he begins swimming back, a shark sneak attacks him. The scene is very fast paced and you can't really make out what's happening, but I imagine that's intentional considering that the shark looks like a PlayStation 2 render. They must have spent all their money on the airplane crash scene because that looked amazing in comparison to this. Brandon manages to escape the shark and make it back to the other side, where he tosses Marty the cap and hands over the oxygen tank. He then proceeds to give Ava a motivational speech,
You're gonna have to do this one on your own.
rather than getting out of the water. The shark then pulls him underwater to finish him off. And bro, Brandon did not need to die. All he had to do was literally stand up or have someone pull him out. I mean, he had enough time to get out of the water. He even gave a motivational speech. After that, a sea rescue team begins searching for the plane wreckage, hoping to find the survivors. They spot broken pieces of the plane and 2 divers are sent down to explore. The divers locate the plane and one enters the wreckage while the other stares at the group, making an OK signal. I'm not entirely sure why he did that, but little did he know that everything was far from okay. A shark tears him to shreds, leaving the group to question.
Where's the other diver?
The other diver is also attacked by a shark off screen. We do see him later, and he looks pretty peaceful just sitting there in a chair. The plane then begins sliding down the slope, but thankfully it stops just short of toppling over. This does, however, make their need to get to the surface much more urgent. Kyle remembers that he saw 2 scuba divers board the plane, meaning that they can use their gear to get to the surface. Dan unfortunately tells us that their oxygen tanks need to be emptied in order for them to fly, but that doesn't mean that they can't use their wetsuits, flippers, and masks. This forces Ava to swim in a secret back door compartment that allows her to access the luggage. She manages to secure the gear, only being scared by an octopus. They then begin looking for other resources that they can use. Jed accidentally falls into the water, literally the same water where we just saw Brandon get eaten, and instead of immediately getting out, he takes his time, smiling and laughing. A shark grabs him from behind, but he manages to get away with 1 foot less.
That's the end of my triathlon plans.
I think this is the most deserved shark attack in the entire film. They manage to stop the bleeding by utilizing safety belts, but it doesn't really help because a few moments later, he passes on. The music gets sad and the acting gets serious.
He was brave, wasn't he?
But to me, as a viewer, I felt absolutely nothing. I mean, the only time we saw and interacted with Jed was when he was complaining about Brandon and when he got his foot bitten off. Why would we care about his death? Anyway, Rosa drops this gem on us
Sharks don't like bubbles.
and the group start creating a plan. They plan to use the scuba gear that Ava secured to swim to the dead rescuer, where they will use his oxygen tank to breathe. Once they've caught their breath, they will then inflate their life vests and float to the surface. To ward off sharks, they will use the air from extra life vests by blowing it towards them. But before the gang enact their plan, the writers felt the need to add another useless emotional conflict. They make Kyle have some stupid trauma of almost drowning as a child.
It was too far to get back to the top.
But in all honesty, all he did was dive a little too deep and struggle to make it back to the top. I have no idea why they included this, because to me, all it is an excuse for him to be eaten. Nevertheless, the gang gets started on their plan. Ava and Rosa make their move first, and everything goes smoothly, until a shark begins swimming straight towards them. Ava releases the bubbles, and surprisingly it works. The shark swims away. They then make their way to the dead diver and breathe some air, waiting for the others. Marty decides that she does not want to live without her husband and chooses to stay behind, which is actually pretty damn selfish. I mean, if she was going to drown herself, she may as well have just let herself be shark meat to let the others get away. Kyle decides that he can't do this, so he gets eaten, and thankfully Dan makes it to Ava and Rosa. Rosa and Dan fill up on air and release their life vests, floating to the top. As Ava is about to exit the plane, a PlayStation 2 shark stops her in her tracks. The shark stares at her menacingly before deciding that she's the chosen one and moves on. I mean, dude, the sharks literally ate everyone without questioning it, but because it's Ava, they leave her alone. She didn't even have bubbles. The shark knocks her goggles off her face and the plane begins sliding down into the abyss. Thankfully, Ava manages to escape out of the front of the plane and inflate her life vest. She reaches the top and oh my god, it's so beautiful. All the trauma of her mother is washed away and all the deaths that she just witnessed are washed away. This is what I would be saying if the movie executed its emotional conflict better. But instead, I just don't care that she survived. Also, side note, are we just ignoring the fact that the sharks can still eat them? I mean, they're not out of the water. Anyway, a helicopter finds the 3 survivors and brings them aboard. They have survived and will most definitely never fly again. This is one of the worst shark horror movies I've ever seen in my life. It's a little better than Black Demon, but still really bad. I mean, they literally had a sound effect for a shark trying to bite a metal plane to get to the survivors. I highly doubt that would happen in real life. I give the movie 3 rotten Damians out of 10. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and for me to reach my goals. I'll see you next week.